everybody, and welcome back to our weekly podcast at International Inclusion Alliance. Today, I have with me somebody who's such a dear friend, also an HR leader and an influencer. And I call him a friend first before anything else because he's been very kind enough and agreed in a jiffy to be a part of our podcast. Thank you so much, Sahil, for agreeing to be here. Thank you for being a part of this podcast.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for having me over. And interestingly, I think this is going to be our first conversation that's getting recorded. So I don't know what to say, what not to say, but bring it on.
We are going to talk about some light things, some difficult things. So the difficult question first. And something which is very close to my heart. There's a lot of conversation that is happening around inclusion of late across the globe. To me, this is something I'm very passionate about. I really wanted your point of view about where we are regarding inclusion today, especially because I know you're somebody who really likes to talk and discuss things the way they are. What is your take on inclusion in today's scenario?
I think, Shruti, that's a very powerful question because, for the longest time, we've been hearing the cliche to say, oh, it's about being called to a party, oh, it's been invited on the dance floor. I think it's all old wine in a new bottle. But in today's reference frame, if I have to look at it, and this frame might change 6 months later or 1 year later, but in the here and now, I think inclusion, to my mind, is about where do you draw the line? You could have people from different diverse backgrounds sitting in the same room, but still not feel included, right? At the same time, you could have everybody being included, but still feeling excluded within. And allow me to explain what I mean. For the longest time, you and I and millions of people in our country have been consuming the so-called comedy show, which has gone viral on OTT. Some blatantly out there playing it on large television screens, sitting with friends and enjoying various episodes. Some rather conservative people actually putting on headphones and listening to it because Papa Mummy ghar pe hain and therefore this is vulgarity and I don't want it to go out, or I don't want people to judge me for what I'm watching. And at the same time, we've all been guilty of the fact of actually letting this content go viral because you and I and millions of people have subscribed to that channel. Now, this went on for a couple of months, only till recently when you suddenly realize that, oh my God, this is disturbing the social fabric of our country, our culture, our values, our beliefs. I find it so ironic. I actually find it so. I'm finding the lack of a better word, but ये ढोगलापन मुझे समझ में नहीं आता. और ये ढोगलापन मुझे इसलिए समझ में नहीं आता कि we are the same people who got this platform or this group of individuals to where they are today. And suddenly, we are now playing chore police to say, now I am the police and I'm going to say this is wrong. Hare, but you're the same person who was actually doing the chori all this while by being the viewer. Now, that is one paradigm. The second paradigm is about saying, in the process of being inclusive, am I equally guilty by being the viewer? Or is it that only the guest on the show or only the producer of the show or only the participant on the show, because they are on stage, are guilty? A lot of people who are backstage as well are equally guilty. But we like putting inclusion as a topic in the boardroom without realizing that inclusion is felt by even the security guard standing at the main gate. Inclusion is also felt by that partner who you have tied up with, who is waiting for their invoice to get paid, and you're giving them 100 reasons of why their invoice is not getting paid. And they're actually thinking that, hey, you know what? Employees get their salary on time, but I have contributed to the success of your organization and you're holding my payment for 180 days for no rhyme or reason. Inclusion is that as well. Inclusion is also about a full-time employee versus a gig worker saying that, hey, you know what? The project was amazing. You called all your employees for an amazing party on a cruise, but very conveniently you forgot me. Hey, gig worker sitting in Dubai, thank you so much for your contribution and you're sending me an email. and not inviting me to the party. Whether I come on that cruise or not is secondary. But primary is, are you inviting me for that party? So I think, Shruti, long answer to a very simple question. But I think inclusion के बहुत सारे पहलू हैं और हमें उनको समझना चाहिए.
Sahil, which is why I brought this question up with you and which is why I requested you to be on the podcast because, as I said, you call a spade a spade. Most of us are living within the boundaries of what we believe inclusion to be, right? A business person will talk about inclusion within the boundaries of the business. A social worker is going to talk about that. But you and I really need to, and I think everybody needs to talk about inclusion within the larger scheme of things very holistically. And as you said, the maid, the driver, the security guard, everybody. And we have to look beyond the fact that inclusion is not the way we just say it. It is about respect. It is about acceptance. So my question to you, given the fact that inclusion is so much more and we need to look at it holistically, my question to you is very simple then. Are we as a world, and I'm not going to talk about India right now, I'm talking globally, are we as a world losing the essence that human and dignity of a human life is far more important than my background, my color, and the various facets of diversity that we seem to have divided it into? Are we forgetting that human rights is over and above everything else?
You've actually given the answer in the question itself. आप ये देखिए, whether it is about the West, whether it's about the Far East, whether it's about the subcontinent, we have seen this across generations, across geographies. That affinity to how I look, the color of my skin, my ideologies actually gets people connected. We may say, and again, I'll give you a slightly closer to home example. When we go and we actually see this across organizations that go out to hire, they say, you know what? English is very, very important. We need to ensure that when you put this person in front of the client, the person should be able to hold the conversation. But do you know most of the deals, whether it's an MMSME or whether it's a large organization or whether it's a small organization, are actually closed when you say, oh, mere chacha ka, mama ka, hamara gaon ye tha, acha, aap bhi wahin se hain. And that is exactly how there is that connect. The moment people break into their regional languages, there is a certain level of comfort that comes in. The moment people say, hey, you know what? I think this guy thinks exactly like me and I think he's very calculative and is looking at my interests, there's a connect. So as much as we may say that, yes, we should look at human rights, this, that, and the other, we have seen communities and caste and religions that have thrived because they have helped one another uplift themselves. Now, would you ever see this happening differently? No. Because there is familiarity, there is a safe space, there is a community culture that builds in, and therefore inclusion happens beautifully in that community, not outside of it. That's point number one. Point number two, let me take you to something very simple and basic. Many times we actually say that, hey, you know what, let's take a picture together. Do you realize that many guys also feel excluded when a girl gang comes together and girls want to take pictures together? We say it's a patriarchal society. We say men at the top in the corporate world and therefore women feel isolated in boardrooms. If that is true at one end of the spectrum, that women feel isolated in boardrooms, men feel equally isolated when girl gangs take photographs at offsites, at parties, so on and so forth.
And very interesting. And I think this is where I always talk about this. See, on one hand, it's so true that we create in-groups for business, we create in-groups for friendship. If I write down my friend circle, I know I come from a defense background. Most of my friends are somewhere or the other related to a defense background. I know I'm guilty of that, despite being an advocate of inclusion and everything else. But let's not take that away from each one of us as people. Now, my thing is, in the larger scheme of things, it is important that everybody gets an opportunity. It is important that everybody gets to be able to sit where you are sitting or where I am sitting. And I do not discriminate against a person because he or she doesn't belong to my college or my school or my community or the same language or doesn't look nice or whatever it is. How do you think we can provide people that opportunity who are not like us? Because as you very rightly said, as humans, we are bound to do that. How do we break that open? I think the how is where I really want to hear from you.
I think that's a good point, Shruti. And I think the first step is self-awareness. The reason why I really commend you for your thought process is because at least you're self-aware that I am surrounding myself with people from the forces, because that's my lineage, that's my background. A lot of people may not even be aware of that. They may just think that this is my natural arena, and therefore it's absolutely fine. It's a blind spot for them. So point number one, are you self-aware? Point number two, do you want to do something about it? Because if you don't want to do something about it, then it's as simple as saying, I can keep it on the agenda of the meeting and then do follow-ups and do reviews, but I'm just doing lip service. And the third of the how and the what of it, I think very importantly is, are you living this in everyday behavior as part of your culture? Because when you're living this in everyday behavior as part of your culture, it's going to show out in aspects when no one is looking. Because that is DNA. That is simple DNA. Today, one of the larger conglomerates that I'm a huge fan of is the Tata Group. And when 26/11 happened, they didn't say that, hey, you know what? Are you Indian or you're a Britisher and therefore you attacked our country and therefore I will save you last? They didn't do that. For them, it was Atithi Devo Bhava. And they actually went out and they saved every single guest at the cost of their own lives. The manner in which we saw footage and we heard stories of people who have survived the attack, it has been phenomenal because people were included 100%, because the end objective of saving lives was paramount as compared to not being inclusive and saying, let me focus this, let me focus on that, let me focus here. So I think that is where your values come to life and the how gets demonstrated so beautifully.
Lastly, Sahil, as we wind this up, my last question to you is, and that's a question that I usually ask everybody. We always tend to blame or put the onus of making change on governments or institutions or politicians or diplomats or people who we believe are sitting in positions. Be it something as simple as elections or something as big as inclusion or whatever it is, we believe that there is nothing, mere ek se kuch nahi hoga. So my question is, if you can leave everybody who's listening to this with one thing that each one of us can do in our individual capacity to make a change. We are not wanting to change the world overnight. I don't think it's about changing the entire thing, but what is that one thing that you and I can do?
I think, Shruti, the most important thing that we can do, and I just did a post on this morning on LinkedIn on biases as far as love is concerned on Valentine's Day, I think is to be aware of our biases, right? Number one, inclusion starts at home. Right? You don't need to get to a boardroom or a corporate world or say, oh, now I am a CXO, now inclusion is on my agenda. You could be a 6-year-old and you need to be sensitive of the fact that am I being inclusive, right? So inclusion starts at home, number one. Number two, we all have biases, right? In some form or shape, large or small, different, indifferent. Are we sensitive to those biases to realize how are we unconsciously excluding people or excluding thoughts or sidelining ideas? And if we are sensitive to that, I think we will be able to be more aware. And the third and most important is, are we committing to action? Because the first two are meaningless unless we don't commit to action. And that action doesn't need to be a large 6-pager policy. It needs to be that one small step that makes a difference to someone you don't know. And if you can take that one small step to make that one person feel included who you don't know, I think that makes a world of difference.
Bang on. Thank you so much for bringing those insights. Thank you so much, Sahil. Thank you for taking out time. Thank you for calling a spade a spade. Thank you for living up to who you are in this conversation. And just very, very heartfelt gratitude for this. Thank you.
बस का श्रुति अभी तो रुला देगी. चलो, take care.